Welcome to another episode of Jancy's Podcast Radio, your trusted space for all things health and wellness. I am your host, Jancy. Tonight with us, we have Jim and Amber. And today we're diving into actionable insight, expert advice, and practical tools to help you live a healthier life and a more vibrant life. Wherever you are in the world, let's get started.
You know that moment when you accidentally turn the shower handle the wrong way and suddenly you're just hit with freezing cold water?
Oh, yeah, the absolute worst.
Right. There is this instant visceral shock. Your breath catches, your eyes go wide, and like every single nerve ending in your body is suddenly screaming at you to just get out immediately.
It is pure panic. Your body is convinced you are in imminent danger.
Exactly. And it's funny because for a long time, we used to do everything in our power to avoid that feeling. But lately, you look at ancient Nordic bathing rituals and now, modern sports science facilities, and you realize people are actually chasing that exact freezing shock on purpose.
Yeah, they really are. It is a profound shift in how we approach discomfort. Instead of letting our survival instincts dictate our behavior, we are now trying to harness that panic response. We're trying to turn it into a highly calibrated biological tool.
Which honestly sounded like a lot of social media hype to me at first, like just people trying to look tough on the internet.
Right, the whole wellness trend aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly. But then I read this incredibly detailed evidence-based guide from Jancy's Wellness Tribe, which was published in July 2026. And they pulled together some of the most rigorous, peer-reviewed exercise physiology and neurobiology literature that's available right now.
It's an excellent compilation. The data is incredibly solid.
It really is. So our mission today for this deep dive is to figure out if jumping into an ice bath is actually doing anything beneficial for you, or if it's just, a trendy way to torture yourself.
Spoiler alert, it does quite a bit.
We're going to extract the actual science behind cold therapy and lay out the exact protocols you can use to boost your metabolism, your focus, and your recovery. Okay, let's unpack this.
Getting into the science is so crucial right now because, honestly, the practice has entirely outpaced the public's understanding of the physiology. Like, people know they feel incredibly alert after they get out of the cold, but they don't necessarily understand the intense neurochemical storm that they just triggered under the surface.
Let's start with that storm in the brain, actually, because the most immediate sensation of cold water is just pure, unadulterated shock. What is literally happening in the nervous system the second you hit that freezing water?
So the moment your skin registers that extreme temperature drop, you have thousands of thermal receptors firing off this massive SOS signal to your brain.
Just screaming for help.
Basically, yeah. Your brain perceives this sudden change in the environment as a direct, immediate threat to your survival. And this triggers a rapid, intense activation of the sympathetic nervous system.
Which is your classic fight or flight response, right?
Exactly. The biological mechanism at play here is extreme. The brain triggers a massive, rapid release of norepinephrine. In fact, the clinical data in the guide shows that plasma concentrations of norepinephrine can actually spike by over 500% in response to the cold.
Wait, 500% just from getting in cold water?
Yes, the magnitude is staggering.
Yeah.
And norepinephrine is doing some real heavy lifting for you here. It radically enhances your vigilance, your focus, your alertness.
Because you need to figure out how to survive.
Right, you need to get out of the water.
Right.
But here's an even more fascinating secondary effect. That massive surge of norepinephrine actively reduces inflammatory cytokines in the body.
Okay, remind me what cytokines are again?
They're basically cell-signaling molecules that promote inflammation when you're stressed or injured. So the norepinephrine essentially acts as this systemic dampener, just calming the body's entire inflammatory alarm system.
Wow, so you get this massive spike in alertness while simultaneously turning down systemic inflammation. But the guide also talks about a second major chemical player here, which is dopamine.
Yeah, and dopamine is perhaps the most heavily studied aspect of this protocol right now, especially regarding mood regulation and cognitive focus. While the norepinephrine hits fast and hard, you also get a gradual, sustained surge in baseline dopamine.
And the numbers on that were wild, right?
Oh, absolutely. Up to 250% above control levels.
A 250% dopamine spike. Sounds like what you would get from a pharmaceutical stimulant or like a massive dose of caffeine.
It is a comparable volume, yes.
But here's where I have to push back a little on the literature. When you consume a heavy stimulant, You get that borrowed energy, right? A really sharp spike, and then you pay for it with an absolutely miserable crash an hour later.
That is the typical pattern, yes.
So if my dopamine spikes by 250% in an ice bath, why don't I feel completely depleted and exhausted the moment I warm up?
What's fascinating here is the fundamental difference in the mechanism of release. See, when you consume a synthetic stimulant, you are forcefully blocking receptors, or you're chemically forcing an artificial dump of neurotransmitters.
Like breaking open the piggy bank.
Exactly. And the brain immediately recognizes this artificial spike and tries to protect itself by achieving homeostasis. So it downregulates those receptors to compensate, which is the biological cause of that massive crash.
Because you are literally draining the reservoir and forcing the brain to shut down the gates.
Yes. It's a forced artificial transaction. Deliberate cold exposure, however, triggers a natural endogenous response.
Meaning from within.
Right. The sympathetic nervous system isn't forcing dopamine out of a depleted tank. The entire network is upregulating naturally to respond to an environmental challenge. The cold acts as a biological signal, and the brain slowly modulates the release of dopamine and norepinephrine alongside it.
Honestly, it makes me think of the dopamine release from cold therapy as like a slow-release battery.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't getting that cliff edge drop. You get this steady, long-lasting hum that slowly tapers off over several hours, leaving you with sustained drive instead of a deficit.
And that sustained elevation is exactly what gives people that profound mental clarity throughout the rest of their day.
Okay, so the brain is firing on all cylinders, but I assume that chemical rush isn't just staying in the brain. It has to be sending a signal to the rest of the body, right? Because the source guide talks extensively about how this alters how we burn energy and fortify ourselves against illness.
Oh, for sure. The brain is the command center, and it absolutely cascades those signals down to the cellular level. Which brings us to a foundational concept in human biology called hormesis, or hormetic stress.
I've heard that term thrown around a lot in longevity circles. What does it actually mean in the context of an ice bath?
Hormesis is the concept that an acute, mild stressor prompts protective, adaptive responses in our cells. It's the biological equivalent of, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but happening at a microscopic level.
Feel the stress itself is the medicine?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
When you submerge yourself in freezing water, your body temporarily believes it might freeze to death.
Which sounds terrifying.
It is terrifying to your nervous system. But you're saying that perceived threat is the secret. Because the body perceives a severe physical trauma, it preemptively mobilizes its defenses.
I see.
The controlled clinical trials in the guide show that this physical shock leads to measurable increases in leukocyte counts, an increase in circulating lymphocytes, and a significant boost in natural killer, or NK cell activity.
Wait, let me stop you there. So because the body thinks it's under attack from the cold, it pumps out more white blood cells and immune defense cells, just in case there's going to be an injury or infection.
That is the exact mechanism. You are essentially taking your immune system through a live fire drill.
Wow, a live fire drill.
Yeah, you are forcing those immune cells into circulation, conditioning them to deploy rapidly and efficiently. It builds serious biological resilience.
That makes perfect sense. But the metabolism side of this guide is where my mind was truly blown. The authors break down human fat into two distinct categories: white adipose tissue, or WAT, and brown adipose tissue, or BAT.
Yes, the two types of fat.
And I think most people assume fat is just fat, right? Like it's all the same stuff. But these are functionally entirely different things.
They serve completely opposite biological purposes. White fat is your classic energy reserve. It stores excess calories for a rainy day.
The stuff we usually want to get rid of.
Right. Brown fat, on the other hand, is highly unique. It contains a dense concentration of mitochondria, which is actually what gives it that darker color. And its primary job is not to store energy, but to burn it, to produce heat.
And the guide states that regular cold exposure stimulates something called uncoupling protein 1, or UCP1, inside those brown fat cells. Who does that, actually work?
Under normal circumstances, your mitochondria are the powerhouses of your cells, generating ATP, which is the chemical energy currency your body uses to function.
Right, high school biology.
Exactly. But when the cold triggers that UCP1, it literally uncouples or detaches that normal energy production process. Instead of making ATP, the mitochondria suddenly start burning through energy stores to generate pure raw heat.
Which is called non-shivering thermogenesis.
Got it. Non-shivering thermogenesis.
Okay, let me see if I can map this out conceptually. So white fat is basically like long-term storage boxes stacked up in your attic. You put calories up there and you kind of just forget about them. But brown fat is more like an active furnace sitting in your basement. And jumping into the cold water, essentially it cranks up the thermostat on that furnace.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that analogy is brilliant because it taps directly into our evolutionary biology. Our ancient ancestors didn't have climate-controlled environments.
No thermostats for them?
No, definitely not. When winter hit, they needed a way to maintain their core body temperature without violently shivering all day, because mechanical shivering burns too much energy and makes it hard to hunt or forage. So evolution provided this internal furnace.
But because we live in modern times, with heated cars and cozy offices, we never actually turn the furnace on.
We live in a state of thermal monotony. Because the furnace is never challenged, the brown fat just goes dormant. Deliberate cold exposure flips that ancestral switch back on.
That is fascinating.
And when you activate that brown fat, you dramatically increase your resting metabolic rate. It also drastically improves glucose homeostasis, meaning your body becomes incredibly efficient at clearing sugar out of your bloodstream to feed that furnace.
Okay, so if the goal is to activate this brown fat furnace and trigger that hormetic stress drill for our immune system, the obvious question for you listening is, what is the best tool for the job?
It's the big debate.
Right, because you basically see two main options out there. You have whole body cryotherapy, where you step into a freezing air chamber, and you have cold water immersion, like an ice bath or a cold plunge. And looking at the numbers in this guide, the physical differences are staggering.
They really are. They might both fall under the umbrella of cold therapy, but from a physics perspective, they interact with the human body in vastly different ways.
I mean, whole body cryotherapy uses refrigerated air or nitrogen vapor, and it gets insanely cold. We're talking negative 110 degrees to negative 140 degrees Celsius.
Right.
Which is down to negative 220 degrees Fahrenheit.
It sounds extreme.
And you stand in there for 2 to 3 minutes. Cold plunges, on the other hand, use water sitting around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. Roughly 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, usually for 2 to 5 minutes.
Right.
Any rational person would look at that and think the negative 220-degree chamber is going to do way more than a 50-degree tub of water.
It seems completely logical until you introduce the concept of thermal conductivity. Air is actually a terrible conductor of heat. It is an insulator.
Like a puffy jacket.
Exactly. That is the entire premise of a down jacket. It traps a layer of air against your body to keep you warm. Water, however, extracts heat incredibly rapidly.
The guide specifically notes that water has a thermal conductivity 24 times higher than air.
Right. Think about what that means for your body. When you step into a cryotherapy chamber, the air feels freezing on your skin, causing rapid surface cooling. But because the air can't effectively pull heat, you maintain a tiny boundary layer of warmth around your skin.
So your internal temp doesn't really change.
Exactly. Your core temperature barely drops. But when you submerge in 50-degree water, the water relentlessly strips away that boundary layer. It is a biological heat thief.
A heat thief.
It aggressively pulls heat out of your deep core 24 times faster than the air chamber. That rapid extraction of core heat is what triggers the strongest vagal nerve stimulation and the deepest metabolic responses.
And the water is heavy, too.
Yes. Water provides hydrostatic pressure, the physical weight of the water pushing against your skin, which promotes lymphatic drainage, something a dry air chamber simply cannot do.
That completely changes how I view those expensive cryo chambers.
Yeah.
But regardless of whether you choose air or water, the source material notes they both share a core mechanism for muscle recovery. They both cause acute peripheral vasoconstriction.
Right, the shrinking of blood vessels.
Yeah, your superficial blood vessels clamp down hard to keep your warm blood safely in your vital organs. Then, the moment you step out of the cold, you get rapid vasodilation.
Which functions as a massive cardiovascular pump. All that highly oxygenated, nutrient-dense blood rushes violently back into your flesh tissues.
It's like turning a hose back on.
Exactly. This mechanical squeezing and releasing accelerates the clearance of metabolic waste, like lactic acid, and substantially reduces delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially for anyone listening who lifts weights. The guide includes a very serious athlete warning.
Yes, this is so important.
Timing is absolutely everything. Cold therapy blunts anabolic signaling. If your goal in the gym is maximal muscle growth like hypertrophy, the absolute worst thing you can do is jump into an ice bath immediately after resistance training.
It is one of the greatest paradoxes in modern fitness.
But wait, if the cardiovascular pump is flushing out waste and reducing soreness, why is it bad for building muscle? Because I see guys at my gym finishing heavy lifting sessions and hopping straight into the cold plunge to recover faster. Are you saying they're doing it wrong?
They are actively sabotaging their muscle gains.
Wow.
It comes down to understanding the very inflammation we just praised the cold for reducing. When you lift heavy weights, you cause microscopic tears in your muscle fibers. Your body responds to that mechanical damage with an acute, localized inflammatory response.
Which is why your muscles swell and feel tight after a hard workout.
Yes. And here's the critical piece. That specific localized inflammation is the exact biological signal that tells your body, hey, we have sustained damage. We need to rebuild this tissue bigger and stronger.
Oh, wow.
That inflammation is the anabolic signal for hypertrophy.
You're kidding. So if you jump in the 50-degree water and immediately flush all that inflammation out of the muscle tissue?
You silence the signal completely. Think of it this way. Your muscles just called the fire department to come rebuild the house, and you just went in and hit all the smoke.
So they don't know where to go.
The body never receives the message that it needs to rebuild the muscle, so it doesn't. You completely blunt your hypertrophy adaptation. If you want to grow muscle, you must allow that post-workout inflammation to hang around and do its job.
That is a total game changer. So the guide explicitly advises athletes to plunge before their workouts late in the day or entirely on rest days. Keep the cold far away from the lifting session.
Exactly. Use the cold to prime your nervous system before you train, or use it on a rest day to manage systemic fatigue. Just don't let it interfere with the signaling pathway right after you lift.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground here. You, the listener, now understand the neurochemistry, the immune system drill, the brown fat furnace, the physics of water versus air, and the muscle paradox.
We hit all the big ones.
But we need to give you the exact playbook. How do you actually start this routine safely and effectively? Jancy's Wellness Tribe outlines the evidence-based protocols, starting with what they call the Golden Rule, the Suberg Protocol.
Named after the prominent researcher in this field, Susanna Suberg.
Right, and the protocol is surprisingly approachable. You are aiming for a cumulative total of just 11 minutes per week. That is the magic number.
Just 11 minutes?
Yeah, you split that across 2 to 4 sessions, so you're really only doing 2 or 3 minutes per plunge.
Which removes a massive barrier to entry. You do not need to sit in ice water for 20 agonizing minutes a day to get these benefits. The law of diminishing returns kicks in very quickly with thermal stress.
So more isn't better.
No, definitely not. 11 minutes a week is the sweet spot for maximizing brown fat activation and the dopamine response without unnecessarily overstressing your cardiovascular system.
But before anyone listening runs out to jump in a frozen lake, we have to talk about safety checks.
Yes, please.
Deliberate cold exposure is intense physiological stress, and it is absolutely not for everyone. The guide is incredibly clear here. You must seek medical clearance before starting if you have cardiovascular conditions, Raynaud's syndrome, uncontrolled hypertension, or if you are pregnant.
The cardiovascular warning is vital. The initial shock of the cold causes an immense spike in blood pressure as those blood vessels constrict. If you have an underlying heart condition, that sudden load on the heart can be incredibly dangerous.
There is another huge warning in the guide regarding breathing. It says to absolutely avoid hyperventilation prior to entering the cold water. Why is that so critical? I see people doing heavy breathing exercises before getting in all the time.
Some very popular breathing techniques involve heavy, rapid hyperventilation, which aggressively lowers your body's carbon dioxide levels.
Right.
The physiological danger here is that carbon dioxide buildup in your blood is actually what triggers your urge to breathe, not a lack of oxygen.
Okay, so if you purge all the carbon dioxide out of your system by hyperventilating,
you remove your body's early warning system. If you do that, and then subject yourself to the massive physical shock of freezing water, it is entirely possible to pass out underwater from hypoxia before your brain ever registers the need to take a breath.
That is terrifying.
It is incredibly dangerous. When you approach the cold plunge, just breathe normally, stay calm, and respect the water.
Respect the water. I like that. Now let's talk about the protocol for getting out of the water, because there is a very specific rule here called the Suberg effect. The protocol dictates that to maximize your brown fat activation, you must allow your body to shiver and rewarm naturally. It explicitly says do not immediately enter a hot shower.
It's the hardest part for most people.
So what does this all mean? Because standing around, dripping wet, violently shivering instead of jumping into a hot shower sounds absolutely miserable. Is that genuinely necessary?
This raises an important question about comfort versus biological adaptation. We have to go back to your goal. Why did you get into the cold water in the first place? If your goal is to wake up that ancestral brown fat furnace and boost your resting metabolic rate, you have to actually force the furnace to run.
So the shivering isn't just a side effect, it's the actual mechanism.
Yes. Shivering is rapid, involuntary muscle contraction designed solely to generate heat. The physical act of shivering, combined with the brown fat trying to burn energy to rewarm your core, takes massive amounts of caloric energy.
Right.
That struggle is the exact mechanism that forces your metabolism to adapt. If you step out of the cold plunge and immediately step into a steaming hot shower, you are outsourcing the job.
You're letting the hot water heat you up instead of your own metabolism?
Exactly. You rob yourself of the primary metabolic benefit of the plunge. You have to let your body do the work it evolved to do.
Embrace the shiver. Okay, let's quickly recap this journey we've been on. We started with the brain, unpacking that sudden 500% spike in norepinephrine that lowers inflammation, and the sustained 250% surge in dopamine that acts like a slow-release battery for your focus.
A very potent battery.
Exactly. And we explored the concept of hormesis, how deliberate cold acts as a stress drill to mobilize our immune cells and flip the switch on our brown adipose tissue funness. We looked at the thermal physics, understanding why a 50-degree water plunge extracts core heat 24 times faster than a negative 220-degree cryo chamber.
Water wins every time.
And finally, we laid out the playbook. The 11-minute weekly protocol, warning athletes not to blunt their muscle growth by plunging after lifting, and explaining why you have to endure the shiver instead of taking a hot shower.
The overarching theme here is how deeply interconnected our biological systems are. A simple thermal stimulus on the surface of the skin cascades into profound, measurable changes in our brain chemistry, our immune function, and our cellular metabolism.
Thank you for listening to Jancy's Podcast Radio. Until next time, find us at jancy.health.